Okay, so let's say that we had these three different graphs. Okay, so let's do these three different problems. So we have, first, let's focus on this one here. This is the graph of function f of x. And for part A, we want to solve this inequality. We want to know when f of x is greater than 0. So what we can do is we can remind ourselves that f of x is just a fancy way of saying y. So what we want is for y to be greater than 0. Right? This is essentially what we want. We are after y, the y coordinates being greater than 0. So if a number is greater than 0, that number is positive. So we want the y's to be positive. So what we want y coordinates to be positive. So looking at the graph here, the graph goes like this, it goes up, and then it eventually comes back down. So, but we want the y coordinates to be positive. So for example, a point here in red, this point is no good because this point has a y coordinate that is negative because it is below the x-axis. So that point is no good. You know what's good? This point here, and this point here, and this point here, and this one here. All these points here are good. All of these are good because all of these points have y coordinates that are positive because all of these points are above the x-axis, right? So for part A, in order for this to happen, what I need is for the points to be here. I need the points to be between, let me draw these vertical lines. I need all of the points that are sandwiched between this line and this line. And I need you to tell me the x coordinates. You see this line, that's -5, and this line is 4. So it seems like this would be the answer here, like -5 to 4, right? This is called an interval, and this is an x coordinate, and so is this. So what this is saying is that, so these are x's, right? These are x values. Okay? So for x values that are between -5 and 4, the y coordinates are going to be greater than 0, because between -5 and 4, we have this part of the graph which is above the x-axis, and which means that for part B, it's the opposite. You see here, you want the y coordinates to be less than 0. And so when are the y coordinates less than 0? The y coordinates are less than 0. Let me do this like in pink. During this part and during this part. So during these pink portions, the y coordinates are greater than 0. And what can you tell me about the x values here? Well, these are the x values that are smaller than -5. So that would go like -infinity to -5, union 4 to infinity, right? That's what this is saying. This is saying that from -infinity, which is way to the left, all the way up to -5, and then again from 4 to forever, that's during these times, that's when the y coordinate is less than 0. What about this one over here? This example here. Now we have g of x. So we want g of x to be greater than 0. So what you can do is you can interpret this as the graph being above the x-axis, right? That's how you can interpret this. What we want is we want the graph to be above the x-axis. So you have to tell them, when that happens. When is the graph above the x-axis? Well, the graph is above the x-axis during these times here, like during this time here. Let me use a different color, actually. It's above the x-axis here, and it's above the x-axis there. And so how could I describe those x coordinates? Well, these x coordinates are the numbers before -3, meaning -infinity to -3. Union, what about these ones here? All of these x coordinates are good because their y coordinates are above 0, and which is what we want, right? Greater than 0. So that goes from 1 to 7. So this would be from 1 to 7. And what about the rest of this? So for part B down here, we want g to be less than 0. So the graph is below the x-axis, and it's below the x-axis here and there in orange. And so that would be from -3 to 1, union 7 to infinity. And for this last one here, we want h to be greater than 0, so above the x-axis. And it's above the x-axis here. So from negative infinity to negative 4. And then now we want it to be underneath the x-axis because the y coordinates are less than 0, which means negative. And that happens during this portion here, which means from negative 4 and beyond.